Welcome to the Holocaust podcast. This is class number 5 in the discourse Ve'edaber Moshe Roshei Hamatos, 5672. This is the 10th discourse in the overall book, B'Shosh Ekdimu 5672, and we are beginning chapter 38. This is going to be the first class in chapter 38. We're just going to do the summary, which we have to still conclude for chapter 37. Okay, just a summary in the previous chapter. So we were learning earlier that there is a hierarchy and a whole system of sphirot and attributes and worlds, and the way it works is that what makes something higher and lower is the degree of the closeness that it is to the source of the kav. The kav is the beaming light of God that is the, so to speak, the infusion of soul for all the levels of existence, God's investment into creation. It's all coming through the Or Ein Sof, is coming through this kav. So the closer one is to the beginning of the kav, the more light there is, the farther they are, there is less light. And so, and this whole idea of richuk and kiruv, being far and being close, is the determining factor of how much light will therefore shine. Just like in any light, even in a physical light, the closer you are to the source, the more light there will be. So therefore, the whole system of Seder Ishtalshalos, which means the whole system of the order of evolution of worlds, which makes certain sphirot and worlds be considered higher, is because more light filters through over there. And the more the filtrations, the more the light gets dimmer as the evolution of worlds continue. So the lower levels, being that they're further from the light, have less light. That's kind of the general idea we were learning. But he's gonna add a much greater depth now in chapter 38, as we're going to learn. But first, let's do the kitzer of the previous chapter. Now the high and low, who Inyan, this is the idea of ribui miyat. It's the same idea of more and less, more revelation, more infusion, more light shining in that sphere, or less light. V'sibasam, and the reason for being more and less, what determines that this sphere, Chachma, should have more light than Bina, it's because hu akiru v'arichok, the closer and the farther, meaning Chachma is positioned to be closer to the source than Bina is, because Bina evolves from the Chachma, so it's staged to develop after Chachma. So Chachma is prior, meaning closer to the source, and Bina is already farther away, because Bina is receiving the light from Chachma, and Chachma is not receiving from Bina. Chachma is directly plugging in to the Or Ein Sof, the lights of Keser, which is generally the pure light of the Kav, as we're still going to see. So the closer or the farther, and Malchus, which is positioned to evolve all the way at the end of the chain, the last of, so Malchus has the least light, as we discussed. Where there is a lot of light and there's a lot of revelation, meaning more light means the source is revealing itself greater. That's called Maila. That's high. The helam and the concealment, and the diminishment to the light, that is considered low. And therefore, the Chachma, the highest sphere of Chachma B'chinas Maila, is considered of high quality. Because Chachma, being at the beginning of the chain, at the beginning closer to the source, has a lot of light. Like we find it in our own experience, when a person has a flash of insight, the first idea as it emerges, an epiphany, a shine, a brilliant breakthrough, opens up in a person's head. That first initial flash contains an enormous amount of powerful energy and light. There's a lot of light there. But when one moves away from that initial creative moment and moves more into the state of analytical, one is beginning to analyze it and brings it into the left side of their mind to fully comprehend and grasp. Because in the Chachma, you're not grasping, you're just like lost in the revelation of it. In Bina, you're trying to grasp it, and you're grasping it, you're processing it into your own vessels, into your own kelim, and there's much more kelim in Bina, like we discussed earlier. There's much more words, there's much more definitions. And automatically in that, it's even though you feel more comfortable with the idea, but the idea has already, the light that's shining in the idea is already dramatically diminished. You don't have such an illumination in the Bina like you have in the Chachma. It already diminishes, and the light gets hidden. Nevertheless, since we're still in the world of mochin, we're still in the world of intellect, there's still a broadness of light. There's still a lot of light. It's not as bright anymore. And it's from a distance, like we learned earlier. It's like the light is shining. In Chachma, the light is up and close, like right there. And in Bina, there's like a light shining, but more from a distance and already not as potent, that light. But when you get to the emotions, Smat Yoiser is less illumination. Like we learned when there's a verdict, we learned in the last piece, when there is a verdict, or when Halacha decides a verdict in the Mishnah and so on and so forth, there's much less juice in it and illumination like there is in the Gemara when you're discussing the concepts. There's much richer energy there than when you get to when it gets distilled to the final verdict, although there is some of that idea still there. Like in the Mishnah, the entire lengthy explanation, Hu Behelim is already concealed. And then when the emotions pass on evolve into the next stage, you're talking. Either you're talking because you're excited, or and you're conveying the emotion itself in speech, or as we learned in last class, the emotion of the emotion is just a general idea that because there is an underlying excitement, when you are a higher level of speech is when the words themselves are conveyors of the emotions, which means the content of those words is to convey your excitement about it, as opposed to just communicating the idea because you're excited. You know, it's a difference. But in either case, it's much weaker than in the emotion. And in speech, even the emotions become concealed. Like we said, that when a person while you're experiencing the intensity of an emotion, you can't talk. And if you're talking and suddenly you get overwhelmed with emotion, you stop talking. You see that all the time in speakers. When they get emotional, suddenly they talk, or their words crack. They start cracking because you can't talk. The words get disturbed because there's just too much energy to fit into the words, into the letters. However, that is only when we're dealing with the post-filtered expression of the powers of the soul as they're coming through a filtration process. But there are moments in life sometimes when there is no filter on a soul at all. Like we said, there's very deep moments, very powerful moments, like a person's wedding, one and only your child's wedding, or something very, very powerful that's happening in your life, where suddenly your soul comes comes out of its concealment and appears with its full potency and power, and it floods all the kochos hanefesh. And when it floods all the kochos hanefesh, at the moments you can have the same amount of light and all the powers. He says, when you experience the essential powers, not the filtered powers, but the essential powers come gushing forth as they are. There, the light is equal in all. Suddenly, there is you have the same illumination in the emotion like you have in the intellect, same brightness of soul. Even though there is still a system of beginning and end, which means the power of Chachma is still considered beginning, and the power of Bina is still considered secondary, and Malchus is still considered Sof, the end. Although the lights are equal, but still, then it's beginning and end, but there's no higher and lower. The beginning and the end stand on one equal footing, on one equal level. They're all standing on the stage together. There's no this one is standing on a lower stage and this one is standing on a higher stage. They're all standing on the same stage, although they're still lined up in a way where Chachma is Rosh and Malchus is Sof. How does that work? That we're saying on the one hand they're equal with the same potency, but on the other hand it's Rosh and Sof. We're going to understand that a little bit more at the end, I think, of this chapter that we're going to be learning. And this was the state of affairs in the attributes of Tohu, which was basically the expression of the Spheros, not without any adjustments, without any filtrations. It was the full potency. It was like the Kochos Atzmiyim, the essential powers of the Ein Sof, came out as they are. And then there really is no Mailamata. There's no higher and lower. There's no order. That's why they were all clashing. There was no respect from one sphere. There was no Derech Eretz. There was no the Zakenim. The elders were not allowed to proceed before the youngsters. The youngsters, which are essentially the youngsters, because they're the Saif, they come later. But that says by the Meraglim, when the Jews came to and they wanted to send spies, it was a moment of Tohu, was a moment of total chaos. Everybody rushed the stage equally, or everybody rushed Moshe equally, and they pushed and they shoved, and they didn't have any respect. There was no sense, because the energy level was equal by everybody. That's a kind of in a tohu state. And then there is a mess. This is the tochen of this week's Parsha, Parshas Vayishlach, Esav's world, where there is just a lack of order, Okay, Lamed Ches. However, now he's going to reveal to us in this chapter that this whole idea that we're developing till now, that what makes something higher and what makes the other thing lower is essentially not in the essential quality of one thing over the other. It's just because in this experience there's more light, and in the next experience there's less light. He's going to explain, no, it's not just that. There is an essential difference between Chachma and Bina and Midos and Malch. Make for each one to be considered higher than the other, not only because of light. In other words, even if the light would shine in all of them equally, similar to what we just learned, it would still be considered Rosh. Chachma would still be considered a Maila, a quality, and Malchus would still be considered Mata. It would be considered and that's because of the essential nature, the essential difference that there is between the spheros. Something that has to do with what a potent light is infusing them, not what kind of power is infusing them. In other words, the fact that this is a refined computer and this is a toaster. It's not just the fact that the refined computer is actually taking in more watts. And it's the quality of the device itself, that this is a toaster and this is a supercomputer. And yet, also therefore, generally, the idea that he's going to develop is a supercomputer is gonna have to have more, because it's of a higher quality operation. It might need to be able to take more power in it, and the toaster might need less. Again, I'm not a technician, I'm not an engineer, so I don't know if what I'm talking about makes any sense, but that's just the way I'm feeling it right now. That because it's superior, that's why it will take more energy. But the determining factor of making it high and making it low is not the power that's flowing into it, but who it is in its essence. And we're going to then explore in a phenomenal explanation why Chachma's, the experience, what Chachma is, which is power of Chachma, which is the wisdom, why it is essentially higher than Bina. Let's see. But we're going to get to that. First, he's going to continue with the theme that a third into this chapter, he's going to begin to change the course of the conversation, as we're going to see. This is this whole level of Ma'ila Mata, up and down, which has to do with what is closer to the source, what is further from the source. Closer has more light and further has less light. Right? This is in as much as we're dealing with the evolution of Sfirot when they're coming one from the other. Which Hashem set up and orchestrated a system. In other words, what it means to say is, God didn't have to set it up this way. Hashem could have plugged each Sphira directly into the source, and that they would all evolve equally at the same time. Now, if Hashem wants 10 spheres, he doesn't have to make Chachma give birth to Bina, and Bina give birth to the emotions, and the emotions give birth to speech, to Malchus. Hashem could have made that the essential soul itself produces Chachma, and then it produces, the Bina does not come from the Chachma, the Bina stands on its own right. And the Chachma maybe will then, a concept that you have in Chachma is then perceived. In your power of Chachma, you have one perception, and in your power of Bina, you have another type of a perception. It's processing information differently, but not that the Chachma has to precede the Bina, or that the Bina is born out of the Chachma. Didn't have to be that way, but in the actual process, evolution, Hashem actually made it that way. But if this is the case, then we can blame. If in as much as we're looking at the spheros evolving one from the other, then we can blame the whole hierarchy. Is if you're the grandfather, you're higher, and if you're your grandson, you're lower, and if you're the great grandson, you're lower your position, because you're evolving from the other. You're receiving the light, and the light is in a state of diminishment. As it's moving from less, it's going further away from the source. And that's the reason for the higher and the lower. So that's what he says over here. When the spheres are evolving one from the other. In each world itself, spherot and attributes evolve one from the other. And in general, in the worlds also, we know there's also a system of evolution. So our material world is the lowest, and it evolves from a higher world called Yetzirah, the world of formation. The world of formation evolves from a higher world, which is called the world of Bria. And Bria, to a certain degree, evolves from Atzilos, from the world of emanation, and so on and so forth. And so too, in the bringing into existence of worlds, one from the other. In order that we should have the lower sphera, that it should exist, the lower sphera, from the higher one, why they it's through a diminishment of light. Just like first he's going to explain, by the way, so now he's going to explain this idea of an ishtalshalos, which causes the lessening of the lights, is he's going to first show it to us in the sphirot, and then he's going to show it to us in the worlds. Just like the bina, the ishtalshalos habina, when bina, the understanding comes from the chachma, it's through the diminishment of the light. And it's interesting, this is something that he's adding over here that we didn't see earlier. We just said that in chachma there's a lot of light. And then when chachma suddenly, since chachma is giving birth to bina, bina is already a serpent chachma, somehow in between the chachma and the bina, the light was reduced. So maybe we'll see it as there's some kind of a road that's connecting chachma to bina. In that intermission state, in that road, in between chachma and bina, in that wiring that goes between chachma and bina, there is a diminishment, a dimmer that dims the light. Maybe just because it's going further away from the source that the dimming is happening, but that's what's happening. But according to that, chachma has a brightness, and bina has a lesser brightness. Okay, but now he's going to say no. The process works like this: that in chachma itself there is an evolution of sphirot within chachma. So in order to produce a dimmer experience of bina, there is a dimming taking place in chachma itself. That means that the chachma of the chachma has a much brighter light, and then the bina of the chachma, the light is already being diminished. And then when it's passing on to the emotions of the chachma, it's already dimmer. And primarily when it gets down to the netzach hod yesod of the chachma, which are the emotions that are all about transmitting to the next level, that's where the real reduction is taking place. So that's what he says over here. In other words, so it's not that it starts after the energy leaves chachma that suddenly it drops. No, it's already working through the entire hishtalshalos. The entire revolution is an evolution of diminishment of light. There's a diminishment of the light in the chachma itself. If the revelation in all the spheres of chachma would have been equal, with an abundant light, the attribute of bina would never have emerged. As a bina could never come into picture because the brightness of chachma would not allow the bina to emerge. The light becomes diminished within chachma itself. What does that mean? That's the concept that we always say, that there's certain Moshe Rabbeinu, for instance, we say that his power he was the Yisod of Chachma. We say that regarding Mordechai is called Yisod Abba. A lot of times we say regarding Yaakov Avinu, that Yaakov is Yisod Chachma, Yisod Abba. These are all tzaddikim and beings that their sole root is in the Inyan, in the Yisod element of Abba, of Chachma. What does that mean? What does that mean? We have no comprehension what that means, but the Yisod is always the ability to connect one level to the next level. Yisod is bonding. So Yisod of Chachma is the Chachma's ability to channel its light down, to transmit, to share with a student. Now, and that's why Moshe Rabbeinu, who brought us the Torah, the Torah is utterly incomprehensible. It's Chachma, pure Chachma light. It's beyond all definitions and beyond all. It's a pure illumination of God. Moshe Rabbeinu was able to capture that and transmit that. That's why he's Yesod of Chachma. That was his divine source. But as we'll see in a moment, from the Yesod of Abba is where Bina emanates from. So what do we mean that there's already less light in Yesod? Ki Abba be'etzem, because the level of Chachma, which is called Father, in essence, Chachma, which means Chachma as it stands for itself, not Chachma trying to transmit what it has outward to someone else, but the experience of Chachma for itself, Hagam shu gam ken yediya, even though it's part Chachma, is part of the intellectual faculties, which means it's in a level of seichel. It's related to the concept of intelligence, so it has an element of knowledge. That is a yediya. In other words, in Chachma you're knowing through your Chachma, through the power of Chachma. Chachma is an experience of knowledge. It is knowing something. It's perceiving a reality. It's knowing a truth. However, it's not really, the essence of Chachma is not really a graspable intelligence. It's knowing. It's almost like it sometimes it explains, like, for example, there is the seichel of the Chachma, there is the concept, there's like the flash, the idea that's already an understanding, but a much sharper, potent understanding than the understanding of Bina. It's like the point of understanding of the whole concept. Bina is already the details, Chachma is the point. But in that point itself, there is the understanding of the point, and there is the vision of the point, the sighting of the point. You see it. It's higher than understanding. You're actually visualizing it. You're seeing it. You're not interpreting it into some kind of an understanding. It's not. There's no intellectual. There's no element of intellect. It's just being able to see it. And there is even higher than the Riyah of Chachma, of the vision of Chachma, whatever that is. So Chachma in essence is a L'mayla Masechel Amos. It's higher. And when you have that brightness in your mind as you're seeing it, there is no connector to Bina, which is full digestible grasping. The two can't communicate because there's nothing to communicate. Bina has to take a intellectual point and flesh it out, but it has to already be an intellectual point. It has to be translated into the language of intelligence. In the essence of Chachma, it's not in the language of intelligence at all. And therefore, Bina has nothing to latch itself onto, so Bina can't be born from it. That's the trick of Yesod of Chachma. Yesod of Chachma, and as he's going to say in a moment, not just the Yesod, that's where the Netzach Hod Yesod is kind of processes the Chachma already from the vision element of Chachma more into the conceptual aspect of Chachma. And it turns it into kind of a point of a concept. And then once you have the point of the concept, then Bina can begin to disseminate it or dissect it. Like will be explained. We're going to see that in a very beautiful explanation in the next chapter, in chapter 39. And if the revelation of Chachma would be, which means if Chachma, the entire range of Chachma would be flooded with the equal light of Chachma, which is the brilliant light of the flash of energy, of light, you would never ever be able to come to a state of Bina. The Chachma has to slow down for the Bina to occur. It's only through the diminishment of the light in the lower levels of Chachma, which was what we call B'chenas Nihida, the Netzach Hod Yesod, the feet of Chachma, the lower half of Chachma. Chachma is a Part5. It has a higher and a lower. Is only in that way can be Atzilus Bina Chachma. It's only in that way where there can be the Atzilus, the emanation of Bina from Chachma. And this is why the light in Bina is less. So it didn't even start in Chachma. In Bina, it starts already in Chachma. And the same, and the same is to take it further from Bina, which is in general the Mochin, the intellect, passing the energy down to the emotions. Over here as well, the reduction takes place in the Mochin itself. In other words, in the Mochin is flooded with the powerful illumination of the lights. And then when suddenly in between the emotions and the in between the intellect and the emotions, in that pipeline, that over there is some kind of a diminishment. That's not the way it is. In the Bina itself, there is a lessening of the brightness of the light. Like we spoke this earlier. We said that in order for the emotions to get excited about an idea, while you're experiencing the richness of the idea, your emotions are not at all excited. The emotions are silent. The emotions can only get triggered and riled up and fired up if you summarize the idea. After you have the richness of the idea is filling your mochen, then you have to summarize it. You have to say, so bottom line, what's the takeaway? You have to give yourself a short description of what you just studied, and what's the conclusion? The conclusion is, this is wonderful. This is great. This is something so attractive, so beneficial, so super wonderful. And therefore, now I want to get close to it. But if you don't have that summary, the emotions remain disconnected. The emotions don't fire up. So you see, so where's that taking place? That's taking place in the intellect itself. In other words, the netzach hod yesod of the bina, the nehi of the bina, is preparing the transmission. It says, by the way, that netzach and hod in the human being are the two kidneys, which what they do is they take they produce the semen. In other words, they cook it, they produce it. What does that mean? Semen, that is the physical, is the transmission of yesod in the procreative experience of creating a child. The yesod is transmitting. Now, what are you giving over in a intimacy? What are you giving over to create a child? You're giving over your essence of your soul. But in order for it to be received by the woman, by the other person, it can't be in the abstraction of soul. So it has to be as I say, physicalized. It has to be diminished. It has to be tangibilized. It has to thicken into a more material type of an element that it can be transmitted. And that takes place in the kidneys. And that's called the netzach hod. So spiritually, it's the same thing. The netzach and the hod and the yesod. The yesod is the actual passing over from one to the other. The netzach and the hod are preparing. It's like a lot of times in your system of computer or whatever, it says preparing for download. So whatever is the inner crunching that's taking place in the inside and in the bowels of the computer, in the bowels of the program, whatever it's doing, it's preparing this particular download to be able to be downloaded. So the downloader itself is Yesod, but the preparation to prepare the files and to transform them into transferable things. A lot of times you see when you have a very sharp picture or a sharp image and you want to send it in an email or you want to send it in something and you can't pass on such a big file, what it does is it reduces the pixels, it reduces the sharpness, and then it now acclimated it for the transmission, and then it transmits. So that's the netzach and the hod of each sphera. So from chachma to bina, there has to go through the nehim, the netzach hod yesod of chachma, and for it to go from bina to the emotions, it also needs to drop, and all this process is a weakening of the intensity of it, of the light of it. So hold on, where are we over here? The emotion should come from the mochen. To the diminishment of the light, that from the lower levels of chachma bina, should emanate the emotional attributes of God. Here he's talking about in God, but we were talking about the human experience, but one reflects the other. And the same is also now. Till now we discussed how this internal process of hishtalshalos, of diminishing of light, takes place in each sphera in preparation for the new sphera to emerge. The same is also in the evolution of worlds. Remember, he said in the beginning, this is in the sphirot and this is in the worlds. In in order for creation to emerge, the three rungs of creation, formation, and completion. But in order for the created reality to come forth from Atzilus, which is a divine structure, a world, but a world as it still is within God. It's still, the world is utterly divine. It's not yet a creation, so it's infinite. So in order for, but it's already it's already the design for the limited creation, but as it's still one with the infinite being. That's the difference between Atzilus and the lower world. In order for the energy to transfer from Atzilus to Bria, which is finite, the gap is so great. Here too as well, the lights are not equal in the entire world of Atzilus. We find an internal diminishment where the light goes down and down and down from first, even though Atzilus in general is dominated by Chachma, which we discussed, but that Chachma energy itself of Atzilus gets weakened as the Chachma transmits to the Bina, and the Bina to the Zeranpin, and finally to the Malchut. And when it's in Malchus, that it was diminished enough that from now the Malchus of Atzilus can produce the world of Bria, and then consequently from Bria Yetzir and Asir. In order that the Biyah should come from Atzilus, Atzilus Gufa, and in Atzilus itself, Mismata, or the light gets diminished, Madrega from level to level. Because if the light would be equal in all the levels of Atzilus, that even in Malchus, which is the end of all levels, Atzilus, it would have so much light, then you would never be able to have the emanation of Bria, Tzir, and Asiyah. Malchus itself has to be on a lower level for her to be able to produce the world of Bria, Tzir, and Asiyah. If Malchus would be illuminated with the powerful lights of the Ein Sof to such a degree, she couldn't even produce the world of Bria, Tzir, and Asiyah. It would be impossible. It's only through the diminishment of the light can be the coming into existence of the worlds. Now he asks a very important question. And even though, how can we compare? Like everything till now made a lot of sense, but over here we can object, because we know that the carrying over from Atzilus to Bria, from the divine to the creation, is a quantum leap, and it's an absolute barrier. There is a Hashem is creating it not through an evolution, but he's creating it what we call yesh me'ayin, something from nothing. If he's anyways creating the world yesh me'ayin, something from nothing, which means that what is being produced has no relationship whatsoever to the producer. There is this absolute gap between them. Hashem is creating something from nothing, which means it's as if it's beginning a totally new thing. So what difference does it make what's in the mind of the mashpia, what's in the mind of the influencer, if the recipient is not at all tapping the world of the influencer? It's completely separated. I think we're going to leave this question for next class and to deal with it, even though this is the last point in this before he begins to turn the corner in the discourse. But still, it's getting, I don't want to pull this because this deserves at least 10 minutes of discussion. Okay. We'll leave it over here. Meanwhile, let Mashiach be here today.